The Farms.com Swine Report is sponsored by Acuity. Acuity Genetics utilizes a portfolio of superior genetics and technical expertise in swine management to advance commercial production. Welcome everyone to the Farms.com Swine Report. I'm your host, Andrew Bodden, and today we're going to talk a little bit about genetics. So when we talk about genetics, there's a foundational component that we all assume, but we don't really spend a lot of time discussing, and that's boar fertility. Today's guests, Karl Kerns and Amanda Minton, are here to discuss capturing relative phenotypes to help us understand and ultimately improve boar fertility. Welcome, Amanda and Karl. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves.
My name is Amanda Minton, and I am the Associate Director of Reproductive Technology for Acuity.
My name is Karl Kerns, and I'm Assistant Professor here at Iowa State University.
So when it comes to boar fertility, we often just think about what happens in the lab at the boar stud, evaluating motility and morphology to ensure success at the sow farm. But in reality, there's a lot of other factors at play impacting boar fertility. What have you seen as far as traditional parameters correlating with what we see in the field? And what are some additional factors we should be evaluating?
So we know that boar fertility is really complex, and as an industry, we started using motility and gross morphology as really guidelines several years ago. And we know that boars with good motility and good morphology don't always have good fertility. And Billy Flowers was really one of those people from NC State that showed us some of the foundational work when it came to looking at those criteria and how that related to the boar's actual fertility. And so what we've done over the past 5 to 6 years is really taken the focus of looking at individual boar fertility. And we have seen that we've got boars that pass our standards in the lab based on the things that we can see. But we have boars that have really poor fertility. We have boars that have 25 to 30% conception rates, but at the lab, it seems to look good. And so as we think about other parameters that we should use, that's where we really looked at our collaborations with Karl and others and said, okay, what should we be evaluating? And we really think that it's important to look at other sperm characteristics such as DNA fragmentation, acrosome viability, membrane viability, and fluidity, and some of these other biomarkers that are relatively new that can really help us hone in and predict the fertility of the boar.
Yeah, and if I would add to that, ever since the beginning of time, since we started understanding the sperm and the egg concept, there's been a centuries-old dogma that says one dogma camp that shows all normal-looking sperm are capable of fertilization, and that's kind of what we've thought for a long time with the motility and morphology pathway. Then there's another dogma that says maybe only a small subpopulation of sperm are actually capable of fertilizing the oocyte. And so as we dig deeper into these biomarkers together, we're starting to really see that later dogma is likely true. We have biomarker after biomarker that's starting to show that even though a sperm might look normal underneath the microscope, they might have normal motility, just like watching people get out of their cars to walk into work. We can't tell the way they are able to walk to work if they can actually do a good job or not. Likewise with sperm. And so we have multiple assays now that we can really get a better detail on their ability to go through these functional aspects of fertilization competency.
So we spoke about Acuity's use of a commercial test herd in our previous swine report. How does the CTH or commercial test herd platform for data capture aid in your research?
So the commercial test herd is a tremendous asset when it comes to capturing reproductive information, because we already want to know individual information about a boar through the CTH. And so since we already are making the single sire matings anyway, we have the fertility data as a result of that. And so that gives us an additional opportunity to get all these other measurements on a boar when it comes to his sperm and his semen, that we can then try and predict what that boar's fertility is going to be. So that's ultimately the goal, right, is to use the field fertility data and capture these other parameters that we get from the CTH and predict that boar's fertility.
So Amanda, how do you see that research approach supporting your commercial partners in their operations?
Yeah, so if I am a sow farm owner or manager or work at a sow farm, this would make me really excited because if we can predict the boar's fertility and we can sell you a dose of semen and say this is from a fertility verified boar, that kind of takes the boar part of it out of the equation, right? So if our conception rates, our reproduction isn't where we want it, but we know that we've got a highly fertile boar, then maybe there's other areas of opportunity that we need to work on since we're confident in that boar's ability. And right now we can't say that, right? We're using pooled semen today with relatively unknown fertility boars as an industry. So as a commercial producer, it makes me really excited to know that there's the potential that we're going to be able to predict that boar's fertility.
I'm going to ask, what insights have you found and what research are you hoping to continue doing on boar fertility semen quality and some of those fertility factors that you had mentioned?
Yeah, and so as we add multiple parameters going forward, we're going to have so many parameters in the future that it might be almost impossible from the lab perspective to look at multiple parameters that we need to be looking at. And so kind of the direction that we're starting to take it in the future is adopting some of the technologies on the cancer detection side using label-free technologies. Kind of like when you put an image on Facebook and it asks, is this Jane Doe, is this John Doe? We can start using deep learning, artificial intelligence, and use multiple biomarker approaches that have trained this model to start saying if the sperm is a good sperm or a bad sperm. And this is going to make it a lot more cost effective so we can do multiple boars and start screening boars even more often as well.
Yeah, I think we need to certainly continue with our collaboration with Karl and others as we continue to look at other parameters, because I think this is going to continue to be iterative in its process. So for example, one of the things that we're looking at is relatively new, and it's something that Karl and Peter Satowski really started working on a couple of years ago. So I think it's important that we continue to be disciplined in our approach and add things that we need to as we go along and take things out that we perhaps don't need to, but it's gonna be a work in progress from my perspective. And I think that, there's always going to be it's going to take a lot of different pieces to tell the fertility story. And so I think at some point in time, there may be just a tiny sliver of the pie that we can't quite put our thumb on. And maybe we'll never know. I like the whole piece of the pie or the whole pie instead of just different pieces. But it takes all those pieces to be able to tell that story. And we need to continue to learn what those next pieces are.
How has Acuity incorporated that into the commercial test herd?
So we are currently in the validation stages of our fertility assessment platform, which we're doing that at the commercial test herd. And so we've gotten to the point where we've collected a lot of data, and through the help from Karl and others with the data analysis from these different sperm parameters, that we're validating that model and hope to have a prediction model available at the end of the summer and early fall of this year. And the CTH is a critical component of that because of the fertility data that we're able to obtain.
What does gathering data and providing indices specifically for fertility and semen quality bring to commercial producers?
I think largely as we look at the industry, we don't know the fertility of the boars that we're using. And that's because we're using pooled semen as a way to provide fertility insurance. And that's a perfectly fine reason to use it. But we don't have the information that we need on the boars that we use. And so what can happen when we pool semen is one of two things. So one is that we get the average fertility of all the boars that are in the pool, the 3 to 5 boars that are in that pool, or we could see the minimum or the maximum of the boars that are in the pool. And from my perspective, I think we're doing a disservice to the sow farms by providing pools that potentially only give them the average fertility potential of the boars. And so I think it's really important that we continue to evaluate boars individually. And as we can predict fertility, then we take that insurance piece out of the question, so to speak. So if we know what they're going to do, how they're going to perform, then we don't need to pool necessarily. And so I think we need to continue to work on that within our industry in the US in particular.
Yeah, and so as we start understanding fertility better and better, like Amanda alluded to, we can start enabling producers to have access to the higher indexing boars. We don't have to be using so many sperm per dose. We can start focusing on only using the best indexing boars that have proven fertility, and make sure that production, we're having minimum days to market. We're putting the most pounds on as quickly as we can, and having the meat quality that the packer wants.
Perfect. Well, just kind of to wrap things up, what do you hope to see in the future? What types of research, data collection, or different assessment mechanisms as it pertains to fertility as performance drivers in commercial production?
So I think we need to continue down the path of looking at biomarkers and seminal plasma proteins with fertility in boars. One of the other things that I'd like to see done is do some more work with the extenders that we have. I think the extenders that we have in the industry do a great job at preserving semen, but really understanding, how that impacts the sperm once they get into the sow's reproductive tract. There's also, I think, some nutrition and health interactions that we need to study in regards to semen production and fertility. That we don't have a lot of data on. Nutrition work historically hasn't been done in boars. It's a relatively small population of animals, but it has a pretty big impact. So those are just a few things. I could probably go on and on, but those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the extenders we use today are based on Beltsville thaw solution that was meant for thawing cryopreserved semen. And so these platforms have not changed since then a whole lot. We've added some simple ingredients since then, but I think we're starting to see that the in vivo lifespan of the sperm after insemination might be limited by some of these older technologies. And so I think we're going to start seeing new platforms of extenders that can come out to really enhance this in the future. And like Amanda alluded to, life begins well before even the sperm and the egg. We have to think back how the nutrition affected that development of those individual gametes. And so that's going to be an exciting area for boar fertility in the future.
Thank you, Amanda and Karl, for joining me today with your great insight on boar fertility. And on behalf of Farms.com and the Swine Report, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to seeing you again soon.